Hello and good day. This is the Bible Bard. A bard is a storyteller who recites traditional texts in the past, and I'm here to recite and to amplify what the literature of the Bible says about who is God and who are human beings. Here's the place we're at today. Back in episode Bible Bard number 77, the title was The Bible and Slavery, and you can listen to that on Apple Podcasts. The link is provided in the transcript. The Bible Bard quoted what the biblical text says about slavery in the ancient world. Some listeners were offended by the topic, claiming that I was lying when I quoted the biblical text. Of course, I would need to misquote the text to be lying, but the accusers weren't being logical. Their objection was less about textual accuracy and more about condemning the Bible and its God for not abolishing slavery in the ancient Bronze and Iron Age world. The Bible does more than discuss slavery as an ancient social practice and provides guidance to certain societies about how that practice should be understood and engineered. The Bible also uses servitude, bondage, and slavery as metaphors for a human spiritual condition, and you know that in this podcast we're dealing with the Bible as literature. So in today's episode, we want to look at that metaphor. Jesus gives us one of the clearest starting points, stating, quote, "No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." That's given in Matthew 6:24 and also in Luke 16:13. In this declaration, Jesus presents humanity, if you look at the metaphor, as a servant. And that servant is standing between two possible masters. Service is not, as it is in our day, a neutral transactional activity. It is allegiance. If one master is loved, the other is hated. If one master receives devotion, the other is despised. And Jesus identifies the two masters in his declaration as God on one hand and money on the other hand. And in the text, this is a foundational division in humanity. A person's heart cannot be finally devoted to both God and money. To love God is to reject money as master. To love money is to reject God as master. Comment, this, of course, is a metaphor, so let's not be too literal in understanding the term Jesus uses, money. Remember, his local audience consists of both secular and religious Jews at this time. In the very next verse, Luke adds something about the Pharisees who were listening, and Luke says, quote, "The Pharisees who loved money heard all this and were sneering at Jesus." That's from the NIV. So Jesus is not merely talking about coins, wages, or ordinary financial life. He's exposing a rival devotion in the hearts of people. Money represents the broader realm of self-interest, possession, status, security, appetite, and earthly advantage. Anything that can be master in the place of God. And I think if you look at that text, you cannot conclude otherwise. The important thing for readers of the text to notice is this absolute nature of the division. Jesus does not describe human beings as independent, spiritually neutral creatures. He describes us as servants and as active moral agents in our service to our chosen master. Discussion. While Jesus provides the foundational division in human spiritual life, the Apostle Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament following the Gospels, clarifies this vision in the choice of words he makes to talk about it. So first, Paul defines the master for the slave humanity. He says, quote, "We should no longer be slaves to sin. For when you offer yourselves to someone as obedient slaves, you are slaves of the one you obey. When you used to offer yourselves as slaves to impurity and to ever-increasing wickedness, you were slaves to sin," end quote. That's from Paul's writings in Romans 6, verses 6, 16, 19, and 20 out of the NIV. This text works really well for everyone in the Roman world audience. That audience, over 2,000 years ago, had a complete understanding of slavery, both as an institution and in actual practice. They personally had observed slaves, both mistreated and abused ones, along with slaves who actually liked their job and expressed devotion to their human masters and served those masters well. For us, for whom slavery is just a written historical record, the impact of these words is slightly reduced. Although I knew a man who, when traveling in Africa in the late 1970s, he came across a slave market. And standing on a crate, waiting to be sold, was a young woman. And when purchased, this man could guess what her fate was going to be in her slavery to her new master, whoever that would be. So he inquired, and he purchased her for $50 in U.S. currency. Of course, she was wary as she was delivered to her new master. But the man who bought her gave her the paperwork, and with it set her free. As he handed her the proof of her freedom from slavery, her face lit up with gratitude and joy. She was no longer a slave subject to the whims of her master, but was now a free person able to make choices for herself. Now, not many, I think, of the Bible's critics have ever themselves delivered another human being from true slavery. They talk a lot. Critics themselves are confident in their abstract proclamation of this or that. But in reality, their hearts are bound up, as Jesus says, in despising the master they do not serve. Summary, according to Jesus, he went on and he says, quote, "Very truly I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin." That's from John 8:34 in the NIV. According to Paul, he says this, and it's an extended text, so I've condensed it somewhat, but you can read it yourself here. He says the following, quote, "For we know," he's speaking of Christians, "that our old self was crucified with him," that's Jesus, "so that the body ruled by sin might be done away with, and that we should no longer be slaves to sin. In the same way, count yourselves dead to sin, but alive to God in Jesus Christ. Do not offer any part of yourself to sin as an instrument of wickedness, but rather offer yourself to God as those who have been brought from death to life. For sin shall no longer be your master, because you are not under law, but under grace. Thanks be to God that you used to be slaves to sin. You have now been set free from sin and become slaves to righteousness," end quote. That's Romans chapter 6, verses 6, 11, 13, 14, and 17 in the NIV. In this text, we see the completion of this extended metaphor. Freedom from slavery to sin becomes a new slavery, which is called devotion to righteousness or devotion to God. Either thing would be exchangeable. In the entire passage from Romans chapter 5 to Romans chapter 10, this narrative looks at human life through the lens of slavery as an extended metaphor, which allows the writer to discuss human spiritual condition in all its complexity using a human condition known to everyone at the time for and in place as an institution for the last 10,000 years, I would guess. Due to modernism as a philosophical movement, we moderns think that humanity has moved beyond the failures of the past toward a more rational, free, just, and advanced future. The Slavery Abolition Act of 1833 was put into effect on August 1, 1834 in England. In the USA, slavery was abolished by the 13th Amendment, which was passed by Congress on January 31, 1865. Slavery, of course, is older than written history, and by the time we look back in history and reach the earliest written civilizations of Mesopotamia, somewhere 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, slavery is written about as a recognized social condition. The Bible does not introduce slavery into human society. It enters a world where slavery is already an ancient human practice. But in the world of the biblical narrative, slavery is greater than society itself. Slavery in the narrative is a spiritual condition upon which the laws of Parliament or Congress have no impact. According to the text, a human being can live their life without choice as a slave to what God calls sin, or can be freed from that slavery to enter a different slavery, which the Bible calls righteousness. And the Bible also calls it freedom, as when Jesus says, quote, "If the Son, Jesus, sets you free, you will be free indeed," end quote. That's John 8:36, NIV. Conclusion. This is the way the Bible Bard works. Brief recitations are closely focused. No distractions, no rabbit trails. We are talking about what the literature of the Bible states, the ideas and concepts it presents, because most people have never engaged with biblical thought. Make up your own mind whether you agree or disagree with what the Bible says. You can go to www.biblebard.org to download a transcript from this episode or others, listen to another episode from the archive, or get links to other materials and information. Remember, the Bible Bard English podcast is translated into other languages by local Bible bards, including Spanish, Hindi, Nepali, Urdu, Swahili, Chigua, and Bengali, and we've just started with Punjabi. We're looking for other local translators. Support the Bible Bard podcast, and I've been advised to make this simpler. Rather than talking to you about Patreon or GoFundMe, simply go to the Bible Bard website, www.biblebard.org, click the Donate tab, and make a contribution. And that will help the podcast expand and pay the translators and provide payment for other internet services. So send any questions to the Bible Bard at BibleBardUS@gmail.com, and we're glad to hear from you. Also, thanks in advance for following, subscribing to, sharing, and commenting on Bible Bard content on our many platforms. You can go to the audio platforms where the podcast is available and comment there, or you can go to the platforms that support the video version of the podcast, and you can support us there. Until next time, this is the Bible Bard.